There was a moment, a specific moment, somewhere in the deep past, when a human being looked at a dead body and understood for the first time that the same thing was going to happen to them. Not just that bodies stop moving. Animals understand that. A crow will avoid a place where it has seen another crow die. A dog will grieve. An elephant will stand for hours beside the body of a fallen member of its herd. But none of them, as far as we can tell, look at that body and think, that is my future. That is what I am. The moment a human being first made that connection is one of the most important and most overlooked events in the entire history of our species. Because that thought, I am going to die, did not just produce grief. It produced something that no other event in human prehistory produced. It produced culture. Let us be precise about what we mean. Anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists have long recognized a phenomenon called mortality salience, the awareness of one's own death and the profound psychological effects that awareness produces. Terror management theory, developed by social psychologists Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pyszczynski in the 1980s, building on the work of anthropologist Ernest Becker and his 1973 Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death, proposes that virtually all of human cultural activity, art, religion, politics, the drive to leave a legacy, the need to belong to something larger than oneself, is ultimately a response to this single, terrifying awareness. You know you are going to die, and almost everything you do is a way of managing that knowledge. But when did that knowledge first arrive? When did the first human being cross that threshold, from instinctive fear of immediate danger to abstract awareness of inevitable death? The archaeological record offers clues, and they are remarkable. The earliest evidence of deliberate burial, placing a body in the ground with apparent intention rather than simply abandoning it, dates to roughly 300,000 years ago at a site called the Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, in the Atapuerca Mountains of northern Spain. Researcher Juan Luis Arzuaga and his team discovered the skeletal remains of at least 28 individuals in a pit at the bottom of a cave shaft. The bodies had been carried there deliberately. There is no other plausible explanation for their presence. One of the most striking findings was a single hand axe, called Excalibur by the researchers, buried with the bodies, made of a distinctively beautiful red quartzite, found nowhere near the site. It may represent the first known grave offering in human history. These were not Homo sapiens. They were Homo heidelbergensis, an ancestral species, which means the awareness of death, or at least some ritual response to it, predates our species entirely. But the story becomes even more extraordinary. At a site called Rising Star Cave in South Africa, paleoanthropologist Lee Berger and his team have found evidence of what appears to be deliberate burial by Homo naledi, a species with a brain roughly one-third the size of ours, whose cognitive capacity was once considered far too limited for symbolic or ritualistic behavior. The burials at Rising Star have been dated to approximately 250,000 to 300,000 years ago, if confirmed. This would represent the earliest known mortuary behavior in the fossil record, and it would be performed by a species we long assumed was not capable of it. What this tells us is that the awareness of death, or at least the ritualistic response to death, is not an exclusively modern human phenomenon. It is ancient. It is deep. It may be woven into something much older than our species. But what happened when that awareness arrived in full? When a mind complex enough to hold an abstract model of the future encountered the fact of death? The evidence suggests something unprecedented happened in human behavior. Starting around 70,000 to 100,000 years ago, a period anthropologists sometimes call the Great Leap Forward or the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. In a relatively short time, by evolutionary standards, humans began doing things they had never done before. They began making art, cave paintings, geometric engravings, ochre body decoration. They began making music. Bone flutes have been found dating to approximately 40,000 years ago in Germany. They began manufacturing complex composite tools, weaving, creating personal ornaments. They began burying their dead with increasing ritual complexity with flowers. According to one interpretation of pollen evidence at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, though this interpretation remains debated with tools, with food, with objects that appear to have been chosen for reasons we can only guess at. They began, in other words, to behave like people who were trying to build something that would outlast them. Anthropologist Ernest Becker argued that this is exactly what human culture is, a death denial machine, a collectively agreed upon set of beliefs, symbols, and achievements that allows us to feel that we transcend our biological mortality. The pyramid is not just a tomb. It is a statement of permanence against the void. The cave painting is not just a picture of a horse. It is a mark made by a hand that will rot, saying, "I was here." The religion is not just a set of beliefs. It is a structured answer to the question that never stops asking itself. Terror management theory research has demonstrated this experimentally in modern humans. When people are primed to think about their own death, even subliminally, they become more defensive of their cultural worldview, more hostile to people who threaten it, more drawn to figures who project strength and permanence, more likely to pursue symbolic immortality through achievement, legacy, and belonging to a group. Mortality awareness. It turns out, shapes almost every dimension of human social behavior. Now imagine that process beginning, not as a laboratory experiment, as a moment in an actual mind, in an actual body, around an actual fire, perhaps 100,000 years ago. A person who has just watched someone they love die. Who, for the first time, follows the thought to its logical end. Who holds the image of that still body and places it in the future where their own living body currently stands? What would you do with that knowledge? You would probably do exactly what the archaeological record shows early humans did. You would reach for meaning. You would reach for community. You would reach for beauty. You would reach for something that felt permanent. You would draw on the wall of the cave. You would bury your dead with care. You would tell a story about what happens after, and you would tell it to your children, and they would tell it to theirs. And the story would change the world more completely than any tool or weapon ever made. The philosopher Thomas Nagel famously wrote that death is what gives life its peculiar intensity. The awareness of an ending is what makes the present feel precious, what makes connection feel urgent, what makes legacy feel necessary. It may also be what made us human, because the animals that grieve do not build cathedrals. The animals that fear death do not paint caves. The animals that avoid the places where their companions fell do not write down the names of everyone they have loved. But we do. We have been doing it for at least 300,000 years. Building and burying and painting and praying and writing and singing, all of it aimed, at some deep level, at the same impossible target, to make something that lasts, to be, in some way, more than mortal. And it started the moment a human mind somewhere in the dark, a very long time ago, looked at a dead body and understood what it was looking at. You are still doing it now. Everything you care about is proof.